Hello, everyone, and welcome to Revolutionary Reflections. I'm your host, Alex. I know it's been a while since the last episode. It is now 2026, and a lot of things have happened since the start of the year. Earlier this year, January 3rd, President Maduro got arrested and brought into the United States, pretty much a semi soft invasion of Venezuela, basically, for trial for drug crimes, if I recall. But also ended up seizing oil assets of Venezuela to be controlled by American companies in the United States. Pretty much just stealing other resources. And then also happened especially in the month of January, was ICE and Customs and Border Patrol doing a ICE raid of Minneapolis due to an alleged fraud happening in the city, where either it was the end of last year or earlier this year, a YouTuber by the name of Nick Shirley went to Minneapolis to discover this alleged fraud where money is disappearing into specifically Somali child daycare centers, which grabbed the attention of the president and his administration, and pretty much had Customs and Border Patrol and ICE getting deployed into Minneapolis to, investigate and put an end to this fraud, even though that is not the role of ICE or Customs and Border Patrol. That is pretty much the role of the Department of Justice and the FBI. But with the incompetence of this administration, it's not surprising that it ended up being ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, because ICE is pretty much the Gestapo, which is pretty much the topic I want to discuss today on this episode. So in this episode, I really want to dive into Operation Metro Surge, which is a United States Immigration, Customs Enforcement, and Border Patrol operation. Even though it technically started last month, it didn't really start ramping up until this month in January, which pretty much was a enforcement or undocumented, pretty much a raid basically throughout the whole city, where they were pretty much looking for, like I said earlier, investigations into fraud, but also finding and arresting and deporting undocumented individuals. The Somali population was the one that was targeted specifically during this operation, but it ended up spreading outside of that, right? Because you have American citizens getting arrested for, just watching, being legal observers, or even getting, pepper sprayed because they're protesting against it, which is all legal, right? As long as you don't obstruct their operations. However, because ICE agents have only had 47 days of training as opposed to, the standard, which would be, I think would be like almost 6 months of training, it pretty much showed like the cracks into how ICE specifically operates, because the Trump administration really wants to throw in as much people as they can into ICE, right? Which, unfortunately, but not unfortunately, have shorter training times, pretty much hiring nearly anyone, regardless of any previous experience or anything, right? Pretty much anyone who wants to do it can do it. And then, there's been stories where a person who applied for ICE managed to get the position because I believe the application screening software was pretty much like based off AI or something. And as long as you mention like law enforcement or anything, it'll just, immediately categorize you as like, oh, you have experience. Or if you don't have experience, it'll just miscategorize you. And it also isn't surprising that a lot of these ICE agents, notice I'm saying agents, not officers, because technically they're not law enforcement officers, like, your local police department. Even though they're still doing some sort of law enforcement function, they're still technically not law enforcement because they don't have any powers outside of like immigration enforcement, really. Which I know it sounds vague, but their immigration enforcement is pretty much like, hey, you have this person who's in your city. Here's their arrest warrant, local police department, go get them type of thing, right? That's pretty much the extent of their powers. Outside of that, they're just an administrative power or agency. But before I go off track here, like I said, a lot of them ended up being, white supremacists, far rights individuals within this agency, which ended up causing a lot of trouble because you suddenly have people who are, targeting individuals because they have accents, because of skin color, racial profiling, basically. Even though technically the Supreme Court legalized that they could do racial profiling, who are they racial profiling is indiscriminate, right? Because they're just racial profiling anyone. Like, oh, you have an accent and you have dark skin, you must be an illegal, even though you could be, a legal citizen of the United States. They'll just racial profile, arrest you, and then once they figure out if you have a American citizenship, they'll let you go in like some random parking lot or something, right? And throughout this operation that ICE did, you also have things where, unfortunately, there are differences between the warrants that they are using, administrative and judicial, right? One's an administrative warrant is pretty much signed by like an ICE agent or ICE agent like commander, and judicial is a warrant that's signed by a judge, which in the United States, judicial warrants are needed in order for, law enforcement or any arm of law enforcement to enter your home and to search it. However, ICE, because of lack of training and, memos where they're like administrative warrants are, all you need to go into another person's home, they have been using the administrative warrant a lot more frequently. And unfortunately for like the average citizen, I mean, by now the average citizen should know the difference between the two because it has been pushed out a lot through social media. Like, hey, these are the differences between your warrants, and one has more power than the other. One allows the law enforcement to search your home and your person than the other. But prior to this, the average American citizen didn't know the difference between the two, right? Because a warrant, right? An officer could have a warrant, but it could just be a blank piece of paper, or it could just be something that doesn't make sense. But as Americans have found out throughout this whole process, hopefully, they're knowing that they know the difference between the two warrants and what's a warrant and what constitutional rights you do have. That as long as the constitutional rights haven't been eroded further at this point. Another thing about this operation, Metro Surge that they did, a lot of these ICE agents showed up at schools, showed up at daycares, showed up at places that, why are you there for? Showed up at workplaces to arrest an American citizen, right? There's a lot of videos that came out of the operation out of Minneapolis, and there will continue to be videos about ICE operations throughout the whole country because it is what it is. ICE is a Gestapo agency who is arresting anyone who either doesn't agree with the political viewpoints of Donald Trump, or you just have the wrong skin color and you have an accent. That's it. That's all ICE is. They're the Gestapo, and because there's very little pushback in the government, especially the Democrats, they'll continue to wreak havoc across this country. 2 Americans died during this operation. On January 7th, the killing of Renee Good, where she was given conflicting commands from ICE to leave the area as she was trying to leave the area. But one agent by the name of Jonathan Ross decided to walk across the front of her vehicle, and as she tried to pull out, he shot her 3 times, killing her as her vehicle collided into a set of parked cars, which ICE, Department of Homeland Security, as well as law enforcement training, dictates that no officer or agent should be crossing in front of a moving vehicle, or any vehicle for that matter, because 1, it can be used for justification to wrongfully shoot at a vehicle, or 2, get you killed, basically, because that's just not something you do at all. It's like walking behind a vehicle. Technically, you don't walk behind vehicles either. You just approach from the sides. That's it. But Jonathan Ross, as shown by multiple videos, including his own, was recording the moment he walked across and towards Renee Good's vehicle. And basically, as she tried to drive away with her wheels pointed away from him, you know, pretty much going, not hitting him, not going towards him to hit him, but going away from him. He used that as a threat and pretty much executed Renee Good, which sparked a set of protests, demonstrations throughout the city of Minneapolis. And, after that was a whole bunch of arrests of American citizens, healthcare workers, pretty much, indiscriminate arrests, right? And then the most recent thing that happened was another killing in Minneapolis, which was the killing of Alex Peretti on January 24th. That's right. Not that long ago, actually, a few days ago at this point of the recording of this episode, which was after the general strike that they did in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota, which was to protest ICE, pretty much saying get out, and which, pretty much went unchallenged for the most part on January 23rd. But on January 24th was the killing of Alex Peretti, right? Because that incident was the one that pretty much sparked protests around the country because, the killing of Renee Good was already polarizing to begin with, right? You have a white American citizen who is female who was killed by ICE. But a lot of people were like, well, she's, a lesbian female. She is all these angles of videos, right? She hit him, all types of things. It's very polarizing. But with Alex Peretti, it was the most damning circumstance because there's so many video angles which showed disproportionate use of force as well as unlawful killing, right? Because Renee Good was already an unlawful killing. And then when Alex Peretti happened, that one pretty much shook the whole country because you have another white American, especially a white male, who, before I continue, Alex Peretti was 37 years old, and Renee Good was also 37 years old. And he worked as an intensive care nurse in the VA. So a little backstory about that before I forget. But Alex Peretti was the second American citizen, white American citizen in particular, who was killed by ICE. And, there's a lot of videos out there as well as, Renee Goods. But there's a lot of videos of a lot of bystanders that were in the area because at this point, Minneapolis was already tired of ICE. So every time ICE was somewhere, there's always going to be someone recording. And there thankfully was a lot of people recording that day because there was multiple angles. So with this situation of Alex Peretti, he was pretty much defending a woman that ICE pushed to the ground. So he was pretty much in between them. He was like, hey, don't stop. He had a phone in his right hand, right? His left hand is up. So technically both of his hands are up. One is holding a phone. And then ICE pretty much wrestled him, pepper sprayed him. And there was one ICE officer that looks like he was hitting Alex Peretti in the head with the pepper spray canister multiple times. And they pretty much disarmed him because he had a concealed carry permit to carry a weapon, a handgun, on his person, right? Legally able to do a Second Amendment. Had his weapon, had his sidearm on him. ICE took away his gun, and in one of the angles you could hear ICE say, "Where's the gun? Where's the gun?" And then one of the officers or one of the agents has the gun, walking away. And then I don't know what happened. I don't know if there's miscommunication or anything. The ICE agent shot Alex Peretti. Watching that video, I believe the first 2 shots have killed him, and then the 8 remaining shots was just shooting his body at that point. And then different angles you see an ICE agent, clap his hands. And that set off a whole chain of reaction around the country because it's like, hey, so I can't have my Second Amendment rights anymore. I can't legally possess a firearm. And it was a blatant execution at that point because, he's outnumbered. What was it, like 8-1? He had, like I said, he had multiple agents on top of him. And then, from the videos, it looked like they were kicking him, beating him. as well as disarming him. And then after they're trying to find, make sure he doesn't have a gun, they killed him. And then it looked like they were probably gathering their stories at the end, trying to figure out what to do, because I believe they walked away from the scene as well. Or if they didn't walk away, they're still in the scene, but they weren't allowing people to render aid, right? Which is highly similar to Renee Good, right? Because Jonathan Ross shot her 3 times, and then you have a physician that's like, "Hey, let me go check her pulse. Let me give her CPR," and they're like, "No, you're not going to do that." And then yeah, and like I said, this sets off a chain reaction across the country, because it's like, hey, am I allowed to carry a gun or not? If I carry a gun, am I a terrorist, right? Because it's the administration and Department of Homeland Security for both of these killings have set off very conflicting informations, right? Immediately, within like the first half hour, basically, they're saying, hey, Renee Good, she's a terrorist. She's a far left extremist. She's a paid agitator. Alex Peretti, he is a domestic terrorist. He's there to agitate and kill ICE agents. He was threatening them. The video is very clear. You saw him hold a phone. And like Renee Goods, it's also polarizing. Not as polarizing as Renee Goods, because there's enough video evidence showing that ICE agents killed him, even though they keep alleging that he had a gun on him before they shot him, or he was trying to grab his gun. All these different angles, right? Even you have Kash Patel and Kristi Noem that's like pretty much verbatim saying the exact same thing. He's a domestic terrorist, there to kill ICE agents, and all these other things. And it brings into question: does the Second Amendment apply anymore at that point? Because you have things like the president saying like you shouldn't be going to your protest with a gun, which there are other instances of people who are on the Republican side, the far right side, who've shown up to protests with their guns. That didn't seem to be an issue then. Why is it an issue now? The Second Amendment doesn't apply to one side only. It applies to everyone. The Constitution applies to everyone and not just one party. And then you have, the conservative media, Fox News, Newsmax, all these conservative media outlets and podcasters running the same narrative. And, you have conservatives and Republicans and pro MAGA Republicans in particular, who are also running with this narrative, which is ironic because conservatives are always the one that says we can't trust the government. We can't trust what the government tells us. We must use our own, our own critical thinking and everything. And then here they are just repeating what the administration says verbatim, even though you could very clearly see the video angles that are there, but they, for some weird reason, see something else, which is crazy. Which begs the question, is ICE being lawful? Is ICE a lawful agency? Or is ICE the secret police, the Gestapo, that is being used for purposes outside of its intended function? Because ICE's functions is pretty much a blend of Customs Border Patrol and naturalization and immigration services, right? Because you have immigration enforcement, that's part of its job, but it blends in like in between both Customs Border Patrol, and naturalization and immigration services, or citizenship and immigration services, sorry. And you have, thing that investigates like human trafficking and illegal goods, sexual crimes, I believe. There's a lot of things that ICE does or is supposed to be doing that could easily be taken over by other agencies within the whole, enforcement arm of the United States, right? Some of it could go towards the FBI. Some of it could go actually fully towards Customs Border Patrol and citizenship and immigration services. Like there's a lot of things that ICE does that's completely redundant since its creation. But, since Department of Homeland Security and ICE was created around 2003, no one back then knew what ICE was really up to. And because ICE could be, it's pretty much like the in between. It's in a gray area. It wasn't until this current Trump administration where it became what it is, the secret police, the Gestapo. Because, like I said, it's working outside of its functions. When it arrests American citizens, when they ask you as you're like walking or driving down the street, can I see your papers? Right? Because, like I said before, the Supreme Courts allow them to racial profile anyone. And if you ask ICE, how do you know I'm an American citizen? What brought you to this conclusion? They could just say, hey, you're brown and you have an accent. So, yeah, let me see your papers. And that brings like so many questions of what ICE is supposed to be doing, what their roles and responsibilities are, their whole legality at this point, because they're pretty much breaking the Constitution every single day as they do their functions or alleged functions, because like I said, they're working outside of their responsibilities. And with this operation that took place or is currently taking place in Minneapolis, a lot of people are comparing it to Nazi Germany, because you have ICE agents be like, hey, where are all the illegals at? Where are the undocumented people at? If you know them, tell us. We'll give you a reward, something like that, which is eerily similar to Nazi Germany, where they're like, hey, do you have any Jews in your house? Do you know where the Jews are? We'll give you compensation. And back then, a lot of people complied. They're like, yeah, they're over there in that house. They're in the roof. There's a lot of stories, especially the one with Anne Frank, that showed us the lengths that Nazi Germany did to find all the Jews that were living within the area of control that they had. And and these stories continue on until America got involved, the West or the Allies, went to Germany and found all these camps, right? Because the Soviets found the camps first, and then Americans and their allies, and the Allies found the concentration camps on the Western side. When you usually things like that, you would learn about it and be like, okay, we know we saw that, and how do we not repeat that? However, America is repeating all of that, actually. And how people are like, well, how did Nazi Germany how did the population allow them to carry out these crimes, these arrests? And as you found out, we know how they do it because we see it right now in the United States. They, you have people who are convinced that hey, it's undocumented illegals. These are the ones that are doing all the crimes. Let's arrest them, right? And for most people, because it's not happening in their backyards, they're like, out of sight, out of mind, not my problem. Until it becomes their problem and they see it, they're like, oh, this is not what I signed up for. Because it is easy to say, oh, ICE is doing a great job, and you're thousands of miles away, or you're the next city over, you're not seeing anything. But when you're seeing that in person, you're like, oh, this is not what I was expecting that they were supposed to be doing. Now, a lot of leftists and a lot of people prior to this were saying, hey, how do you arrest so many people in such a short period of time? And a lot of people didn't really connect the dots. The Democratic Party didn't really ask that question. And we found out how. Just arresting anyone who is of, a different skin color, who have an accent, who may not be American, but they are American. All these things. And it shows that there's a lot of work needing to be done here in America where, you need to have people who are who need to understand what is going on, why it's bad, and how to stop it. Because if we keep going down this road, at this point, at some point in the future, might be the near future, because we're only in year 2 of the Trump administration, or in the beginning of year 2 of the Trump administration, which feels like a very long time at this point. But there might not be any midterms. There might not be another election. And all these protests that happen, they're doing something. They're letting people know, like, hey, we know that you feel the same. Come out and protest with us. As you see around the country, you have people who are protesting against ICE. They're like, abolish ICE, get ICE out. More specifically, abolish ICE, because, like I said, they're an agency that is in between two other agencies that operate in a gray area. So you're not alone on this. And for those that support this, the action of ICE and the state killing, your fellow Americans, are you American at this point? Because it seems like you're not. Because you're letting them trample all over your remaining constitutional rights at this point. All because of what? You get to own the libs? Is that it? You own the left? Because that's all that apparently matters to these conservatives, is that, hey, we need to own the libs. We need to own the left. We need to get rid of their rights, even if it gets rid of my rights, type of thing. It's sick. It's disgusting. It's anti-American. Quite literally anti-American. Because if you're, one of those pro-MAGA conservative Republicans who are like, hey, arrest the illegals, arrest the undocumented, also arrest the liberals. If you can't arrest them, kill them. Because at some point, they're going to turn it around. And because there's always a list, right? Because currently the list is at undocumented and illegals. What's going to be next? Liberals? People who oppose the Trump regime? Because at some point it'll get to where they're like, hey, we got rid of all these people, but we still got more work to do. What's your IQ level? Is it within acceptable range? It's not? Well, maybe we could fix that somehow for you. How do you feel about menial labor? And it just, there's always a list. At some point it ends somewhere or not. Because with this current level of American fascism, which was always going to head this way, unfortunately, because the Red Scare during the Cold War made people scared of the word socialism and anything that is socialism that benefits the people. So it carefully crafts this narrative that, like, anything that helps people is bad, but also tax cuts for the rich and corporate welfare is what's needed, which brought us, to Trump too, basically, because the economic conditions have gone so bad, right? There's not enough jobs, things are expensive and everything, and people are scared of the word socialism. There's only one direction you go at that point, which is towards fascism. And fascism, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, always comes to an end at some point. And it doesn't end until there's a lot of bloodshed, or a lot of people that get killed, because either American citizens get killed, or there's a civil war, or if there's neither of those two things, you have other countries that are like, hey, we see you right there. Also, you're spilling over into our territory now, so we're gonna have to fight back against you. And then starts World War III, or a regional war, basically, because at this point America's too concerned about this side of the hemisphere to give a damn about the rest of the world. So it might not be a world war, it just might be a regional war. But fascism will always come to an end. And when that end comes, it will not be for the better. Because, the saying, it gets worse before it gets better. If the country doesn't exist anymore, what's there to get better? Because you have a fragmented country at that point. The Constitution doesn't matter at that point. Because once Trump and this regime get rid of the American Constitution, because all the power is currently with the executive branch, or most of the power. But as they start ripping up the Constitution, and God forbid they rewrite a constitution, it will fragment the country. It will cause a rift. It might cause a whole civil war. And the United States, as we know it currently, might not exist in the future because of the rift. Because once you take something apart, it's very hard to put something back together. And with the polarization, with Trump, with ICE, and with everything, putting the country back together might be impossible. And all the things that we enjoy now might not exist in the future. So that's something I really want you guys to think about, is like, hey, do we want to keep heading in this direction? Or can we turn the ship back around? Because there's still a chance to turn the ship back around at full speed. But it's only if you want it. And it's only if you want to fight for it. Right? Because currently, the only way to fight for it is through protesting, is through recording, is through, because we live in the 21st century. Everyone has a phone in their hand. Everyone has surveillance in their hands. Take out your phone, record, protest, do anything you can before we get to the point of no return, which is, like I said before, either they rewrite a whole new constitution, the civil war breaks out, or other countries take notice and take action. And like I said, America as we know it does not exist in the future. So as America currently exists right now, even as messed up as it is, there's still chances to turn back around. And I want you guys to think about that. So I'll see you guys next time on the next episode of Revolutionary Reflections. I don't know what I'll talk about then.